All right, let's get after it. I'm Ted Daniel. I'm an investigative reporter at WFXT Boston 25 News. This is our world headquarters here where I'm coming to you from. And I've been so fortunate to have Peter Tragos join me weekly to break down the events of the Karen Reed case. He is a lawyer based in Tampa, Florida, and he has multiple streams. He's known as Lawyer You Know, and he is able to kind of give me insights that go beyond my pay grade, and I think that's so important for our viewers. We are taping this on Thursday, and there is no court today. Judge Canoni announced that due to the hot temperatures in the Boston area, that she didn't want to put the jury through that. And I posted that, Peter, on my X feed, and people went ballistic. They were brutal to Judge Canoni. They're like, "Oh, what a hack! She's just trying to take a day off." And I side with her on this one. Courthouse built in 1827, so it's like
Wow.
nearly 200 years old. There's I don't even know if there's central AC, but if there is, it sucks. They have portable units in the courthouse, in the courtroom, but as you've watched the trial, they constantly get shut off because nobody can hear anybody when they're on. So, I mean, probably a smart thing to do, right?
I get where she's coming from with that. We'd never have court in Florida if that was a problem. And maybe they could spend some of the money they've spent on this Karen Reed prosecution on fixing the AC problem in the courthouse. That seems like it might be a better use of funds. But honestly, I will just tell you from a lawyer's perspective in trying cases and knowing scheduling issues come up, we know the defense, based on what Karen Reed said, had about have about 3 days left. We can talk about what that means, but we know for a fact at least a good chunk of that is going to be expert witnesses from ARCA. And we know they're from out of town. We know they're not just going to show up whenever they're next on the board. So my guess is they're planning on coming Monday. And if the defense only had one more day of evidence, Judge Canoni's got to make a call with the scheduling. And good judges, I will say, usually take the brunt of that. If there's a scheduling issue, if it feels like we're wasting a jury's time, the judge will usually make up a reason. Maybe it is because it was hot. Maybe it was an air conditioner issues. But I've had judges say, hey, I've got some hearings tomorrow, and it might just be in the morning, but the judge will say, I've got hearings tomorrow, so we've got to kick it to the next day, or we're not going to be able to start till noon, or we're going to have to finish at 1 because I've got some work I need to do as the judge. So the jury doesn't look to either side of the lawyers and say, man, the defense is really wasting our time taking an entire day off Thursday because their witnesses aren't showing up, and hold it against the defense. So instead of that, it could be as simple as Judge Canoni had to come up with a reason why we weren't going to have court today because of a scheduling issue, and this is what she came up with. Or maybe she really doesn't want to show up because it's too hot. I don't know, but I have had that happen in trials before.
Well, it is supposed to be 90 degrees today, so it's going to be for Boston. It's going to be a hot one. One of the things that I haven't really covered on TV this week or posted a lot about, but which is something I think that we should talk about, is the defense filed their proposed jury instructions this week, and you can probably help me understand a little more why those are necessary. But a couple things that I noticed: they want a missing witness instruction for, what is it, Brian Albert, Brian Higgins, and Michael Proctor. So the prosecution is not calling those three very important players in this case. So what does that mean? What does that instruction entail, and how does it work in the favor of the defense?
So, number one, it probably indicates the defense is not calling those witnesses either, which is interesting and something we talked about throughout the entire Commonwealth case in chief. Will the defense call those witnesses? Sounds like the answer is no to that. But in Massachusetts, there are lines as to how far you can go in making certain arguments and closing argument. And one of them is there's a limit to how much you can argue the other side not calling a witness without first the court allowing you to do so. And in this scenario, it has to be witnesses that are favorable to the other side, that are available to the other side, that the other side chose not to call. And in this situation, you are then allowed to have a jury instruction that allows a negative inference to the side that those witnesses were friendly to. So what that means in lay people speak is they can get up there and say, Proctor, Higgins, Albert, all were Commonwealth witnesses. The Commonwealth decided not to call them because they would be bad for the Commonwealth. They would prove Karen Reed is innocent, or they would prove reasonable doubt, or Proctor is so bad and so much of a cancer and screwed this case up so much and was so biased that even the Commonwealth didn't want to call him when they could have. It's unheard of that the lead investigator would not be called in a case like this. So they want permission to just go full bore arguing that. They want an instruction from the court, which really beefs up a lawyer's argument to say even the judge is going to tell you they could have called that witness and didn't, and you can look at them negatively for it. So it's just kind of bolstering their argument for not calling those witnesses. I would think, like most jurisdictions, even if they don't get this instruction, they're still allowed to argue, why do you think the prosecutors didn't call Michael Proctor lead investigator, and then go into a lot of the evidence that already has come out about Michael Proctor.
Okay, I get it. So technically, the jury is not supposed to hold that against the Commonwealth, but this instruction might allow, if this is approved, it might allow the defense to make that argument and for the jury to say, okay, I will make a negative inference in this
Definitely
situation.
bolsters that argument. Yeah,
Okay.
absolutely.
All right. Lucky Lochran, Brian Lucky Lochran. He testified. We're kind of working backwards. And he is the Canton plow driver. Obviously, it was a snowstorm the night that John O'Keefe was killed. He drives a plow truck that I guess is called Franken truck because it's, I guess it's been cobbled together, but it's got a ton of lights on it and super important witness, right? So he says that the Commonwealth's timeline is that John O'Keefe's body would have been on the front lawn of 34 Fairview sometime before 1 a.m. That is their timeline. Lochran says he's plowing the street at 2:30 a.m. looking on both sides. He has these huge lights. He's up higher than you would be in a normal vehicle. He doesn't see a body, he says. And when he passes by an hour later at 3:30 a.m., he says he sees that Ford Edge. And just for some context here, I'm not sure if this came out during testimony, but at least at the time, members of the Albert family, maybe possibly two, owned a Ford Edge. So I don't think his testimony resonated in the first trial much. I never heard any of the jurors who've spoken really say that that was something that moved the needle. But what about this time around?
Yeah, I think that Lally did a decent job crossing him the first trial, actually, and highlighting some of the memory issues or changes in the timeline, issues with hitting that basketball hoop. The defense did a much better job this time of neutering that in their direct examination. I also think he was so much stronger in his testimony. He
I
pushed
agree.
back. If Hank Brennan would
Absolutely.
say, you were wrong, he's like, no, I know what I saw, and I know I started at this time, so it only could have been that time. So if I was mistaken, it was an amount of time that didn't matter, or my math was wrong. But if you really add it up, it is right in the timeline that I said. And he wasn't going to let him say that he changed his testimony, or that he was threatened, or that he's coming up here and lying so that he can get some public clout. He was really strong in his testimony. I thought his demeanor was really likable, really honest, and really credible before the jury this time, significantly better than last time. And I have a vague memory of some juror saying, they didn't really think much of Lucky Lochran's testimony because either it wasn't credible or they just weren't sure whether or not he actually saw it.
And Brennan essentially suggested that Lucky Lochran had been pressured to testify for the defense and make these statements because of Turtle Boy, the content creator, Aiden Carney. And he was actually sitting right behind me in court when and we were talking about that when this all came out. He made this argument that Turtle Boy had written about him and that was going to expose bad things about him if he didn't say things that were beneficial to the defense. But I think Yannetti countered that in a pretty good way when he said, okay, in terms of the timeline, you told, I think it was their defense investigator, this information about driving by months before Turtle Boy ever contacted you. So my understanding is he had already made these statements before his name was even brought out into the public.
Yeah, and Hank Brennan was a little sneaky with his timeline and some of the dates he was saying, because he even got me where he was saying something like an article came out one day before he testified at the last trial to make the time and look up, and then it was actually the year before. Very shaky. I don't like that feeling when I hear an argument from a lawyer. I don't like the feeling like, is this lawyer lying to me? I know judges hate that. he may have come back up and corrected it, but I feel like that type of stuff has happened a couple times, and I don't like that feeling personally as somebody watching a trial that now I've got to be like, is that actually true what the lawyer's saying? I like to give lawyers the benefit of the doubt, which maybe is my own fault and bias towards lawyers. But yeah, I feel like the timeline ended up crumbling for the Commonwealth when it came down to the fact that he was saying these things that were beneficial to the defense just days or weeks after this all happened, before any pressure came out, before anybody even really knew his name was connected to this case. Was there pressure afterwards? Are there a lot of eyeballs on this? Is there a lot of public pressure generally? Maybe. But if I'm Hank Brennan, that's not something I want the jury feeling, that there's a lot of public pressure behind Karen Reed. So you better be behind Karen Reed or else. I don't want the jury feeling that.
Yeah, and I've sort of seen with the last few witnesses here, Brennan, whether you like him or not, he can be effective. It's sort of these Jedi mind tricks where he's very, he'll ask these questions very quickly. And, I think questions, obviously he knows the answer to the questions, but questions that he knows he's going to get a no response to, but it gets in front of the jury. And, he's a guy who's a defense lawyer. That's what he's done all his life. And he's using sort of those same tactics you don't normally see from a prosecutor in his line of questioning. But I think at times it has been effective. So prior to Lucky Lochran, we also saw a now Boston cop who was a Canton cop named Kelly Dever. Don't call her Dever. She'll light you up. She lit up Jackson for that. So we all know that the FBI was investigating claims of corruption in this case. And the way I understand it, so the FBI does this document dump where they turn over a lot of their findings from their investigation. And in that document dump, apparently had this interview that FBI agents did with Kelly Dever, who was a Canton cop in 2022 when John O'Keefe was killed. And Dever had told the FBI that she actually worked overtime the morning that John O'Keefe was killed, and she was at the police station that morning and that day, and she said that Brian Higgins, the ATF agent who was at 34 Fairview Road, and the then Canton Police Chief Ken Berkowitz were in the Canton Police garage with Karen Reed's Lexus for a, quote, wildly amount of time. So the defense is like, oh my gosh, we're calling her, slam dunk. This is a really good witness. But they, prior to her getting on the stand, I don't know the timeline on it, one calls the other, and Dever tells them, actually, I screwed up on that. That was a, quote, distorted memory. And that led to some fireworks in court. There was no love between her and Alan Jackson. Your thoughts on Kelly Dever and how, what could have been something very important for the defense kind of fizzled because she says, no, bad memory.
So yeah, I think it depends on how you look at it. There are some people that thought she was an A+ great witness for the defense because they got that fact out and she showed the thin blue line. The commissioner, she had to meet with the commissioner and, he basically told her to testify a certain way is what the defense, wants the jury to think. But I kind of saw it as, I don't think she was worth the risk of calling for the defense because she did make it look like they called her and threatened her. Now, they called her and threatened her and said, just tell the same story you already told. They didn't tell her what to say, but I think it's adding fodder to Brennan going to be able to say these defense lawyers, they tell witnesses how they want them to testify. They delete text messages on Signal. They're feeding witnesses, expert witness information when they shouldn't. And I think it's going to add to that because of how she made it look and because she was called by the defense. If she was called by the Commonwealth, I think it would have been a much better look for the defense. But because the defense chose to call her, I think you summarized what the defense was trying to get out of her. I just don't know how effective it was because of all those fireworks, because of all that battling back and forth. And, does the jury believe the defense attorneys? Do they like the defense attorneys? Do they trust them at this point? They've been with them for 6 or 7 weeks. If they do, I think she was a great witness for them. If they don't, and they still are like cop versus defense lawyer, I don't know how effective she was. I don't think she was worth the risk of calling personally, but, these defense lawyers are great lawyers. They're experienced lawyers. They know this case inside and out 1,000 times better than I could ever know it. So I believe they know what they're doing, obviously, with it. They're not calling Proctor. I feel like I would have called Proctor. Yeah. They are calling her. So I think they know what they're doing, and we'll kind of see if there's a method to the madness when it's all said and done. And every lawyer trying a case, it's a delicate dance. Not everything is perfect. You're going to have to adapt as it goes. Not every witness presents exactly like you should. And I get to sit here afterwards and say, oh, they should have called them. They shouldn't have called them. It was good. It was bad. But generally speaking, I think the redirect from Jackson was A plus. I think he did as good of a redirect as you possibly could after maybe a little bit of a surprise on direct of how it went kind of off the rails. And I thought it was a pretty good cross by Brennan. And, you mentioned Brennan, a really good cross there. I thought he had a really good cross on Baros, who was a plus witness for the defense, who I'm sure you're going to talk about. But I thought he struggled crossing Dr. Russell and Lucky Lochran personally. So it's kind of, we've seen some good and some bad with the cross of Brennan.
And something that sort of struck me during Devers' testimony is she said how she sort of came to the conclusion that it was a false memory is that she was confronted with the fact that she had already left the Canton police station before Reed's Lexus even arrived there. And had that not been documented somewhere or figured out by the feds or someone else, I would think that the defense would have hammered her on that. I think the defense would have, they didn't go down that road. They didn't say, what time did you leave leave that day? Is there, evidence that shows you clocking out or something like that? They didn't touch that. So I'm assuming that maybe the feds were the ones who said, no, that doesn't add up. She was gone. Lexus doesn't come till, after 5 or around 5 to the Canton police station. She's out of work way before that.
I left Lucky Lochran's testimony thinking he did not see a body in the yard. I left Devers' testimony saying, I have no idea if she saw Higgins and Berkowitz and for how long and when with the Lexus. And that was kind of how it came across to me. Maybe some people are like, oh, I guarantee at 3:45 they were back there with the Lexus doing something nefarious. I kind of feel like you did. They left some of that on the table. I'm not really sure if I believe that she saw them when she said she saw them. I just don't really know what to take from her testimony, frankly. That's just the way I saw it, which is one person. Other people can feel free to disagree as they have
Yeah.
with my take and kind of view of her, but that's kind of how I saw her testimony as well.
You brought up Nicholas Baros. He is a Dighton police sergeant. Dighton is the town in southeastern Massachusetts where Karen Reed's parents live. And that's where she went on the 29th after leaving Meadows. So Michael Proctor and Yuri Buchanan, I believe, show up to tow her Lexus, and they call Baros because that's standard protocol to have another officer from the town that they're visiting just to be there. Baros says he looks at the taillight, he sees the taillight, and I thought this was effective. Yannetti shows a picture of the taillight completely missing, all the plastic. He says, no, that's not, absolutely not, is the word he used. That's not what I saw. He said it had a hole about the size of a dollar bill on it. But I thought Brennan was extremely effective in sort of crumbling his memory. Your thoughts on that?
I thought he was extremely effective getting Baros to agree. His memory is not perfect. He was wrong about something he said on the stand with whether or not he saw the picture last trial, and he does not have a perfect memory, and his memory does not get better with time. But like we said with Lucky, like we said with Dever, I came away from Baros's testimony that he absolutely did not see the taillight in the condition that it was seen later at Canton PD, and that he absolutely pointed to the piece, and it made perfect sense. That red piece that is about the size of a dollar bill, that if you're going to back into something on the side of that mirror, that red piece would break. I came away absolutely believing that from his perspective, in his eyes, that's what he saw, and it was absolutely not the same as what happened or what it was shown at Canton PD. So even after I agree, a completely effective, as good of a cross as you can do for Hank Brennan, for somebody that just landed a haymaker against your entire case, I thought he did an amazing cross-examination on that, but still, I just felt like Baros was believable. And I felt like he didn't have a dog in the fight. He wasn't trying to push for one side or the other, but he was very certain about what he saw with that taillight.
And Jackson established that. I thought he did a really good job. His initial line of questioning for Baros was exactly what you said, that he doesn't have a dog in this fight. He's, in a town that's 40, 50 minutes away. He's not connected to Proctor or any of the people. Canton we've seen is so parochial. Everybody knows everybody, and everyone's brother is a cop or on the
Right.
select board, but no, here's this guy who is just sort of completely removed from all of that, and his testimony has not changed. This is where he's been from the get-go. Sort of one of the more dramatic things that happened this week is Bob Alessi vigorously demanding a mistrial in this
Mhm.
case. And that was based, and tell me if I have this correctly, is during a line of questioning that Brennan had. Brennan slipped in the absence of dog DNA. And this, yeah, Doctor, when they were
Right.
questioning Dr. Marie Russell, and the fact that they took swabs from John O'Keefe's clothing, and I know there's been a lot of concern about how all that was done, but they sent it to a lab in California. And they said no, there was pig DNA, but no dog DNA. So Alessi comes out and is like, "All right, stop the presses, we got to end this now." Well, is that more for an appeal argument, or was that something that was legit?
Yeah, I think the defense attorneys are pretty confident no matter what happens in this case. Judge Cannoni's not going to grant a mistrial, so you can call it for appellate purposes. But you do have to make the objection. You do have to ask for mistrial. You do have to make the argument and lay the record, which he did. And I think seeing Lucky Lochran kind of gave us an idea, right? He brings in the blogger, he brings in articles, he shows Lucky Lochran articles. That stuff wasn't in evidence either. So you're allowed to cross examine witnesses on collateral issues or issues outside the trial when it comes to their credibility. The issue is how much detail are you allowed to use and how much are you allowed to testify and state something as a fact like there was no dog DNA. And from my perspective, the Commonwealth was allowed to use that as a sword and a shield in this trial. They didn't bring it up in their case in chief, so it was kind of a shield.
Yep.
And now they're using it as a sword because the defense wasn't able to attack it and to say what was swabbed, where was it sent, chain of custody, Proctor did it. They weren't able to dig into the issues with that, lack of dog DNA and potentially dig pig DNA being in there. And he was just allowed to say it as if it was a fact to Marie Russell. And he was allowed to, as Hank Brennan does, state it the way he wanted to state it and the way he sees the evidence, regardless of sometimes how it comes in, which can be very effective for a lawyer. And good lawyers can use evidence to the best of their ability and to the best of their case. And that's exactly how it came out. And it was inappropriate because it was facts, not in evidence. It was not just an article that the jury could read for themselves or see the picture for themselves. It was very different when he
Yep.
is basically testifying. What are those lab results? What do they mean? How are they done? And none of that came out in evidence. So it was a problem, and that could be a big issue for appeal when it's coming to cross examination of a defense witness.
And okay, an appeal is filed, do you make it on what you think is the most important issue, or do you throw everything in and say, here are all the issues we believe are appealable?
Any good lawyer can find 100 issues in every trial that you could appeal, right?
Okay.
Especially this trial, especially
Yeah.
one this long. You have to pick your best arguments. Usually it's your best two or three. Some people go up to four, but one of those arguments sometimes there's no real line, right? Different lawyers
Yep.
have different feelings about that. But one of the arguments you can have is cumulative error. There were just so many little errors or big and little errors throughout this trial that it just couldn't have been a fair trial overall. And so sometimes lawyers will pick that, and that's a way where you can pile a bunch in.
All right. Well, I thought it was a super interesting week. This is one of I don't know, maybe just because was in the courtroom every day. I thought there was just really interesting testimony and fireworks at certain times. And we're getting to home stretch. Karen Reed said yesterday after court that her team may be done on Tuesday, and then the prosecution gets to call their rebuttal witnesses. And then we get to the home stretch, and I have no idea which way the jury's going to go, man. I'm like, everyone always asks me that. What do you think? And I'm just like, I have some feelings on the second degree murder portion of it, but the other stuff, I just don't know. And we will all be waiting with absolute bated breath. All right, one interesting. So I always like try to talk to Alessi. He's because I find him just he's such a character. All right, some things I learned about him this week. His dad was a Golden Glove boxer. He's a boxer. And if anyone ever wants to bet you on how many times his nose has been broken, take the over. He said 7, and he pushed in his nose. He's like, I got no cartilage. No, I
Yep.
just find him. He's a super nice guy. He's a total chatterbox. And there are times when, we can't talk about the case, but we do get to talk to the everyone involved, and you learn some interesting things. Well,
Yeah. That's
Peter,
awesome. My grandfather was a trainer for some big time boxers like Roberto Duran, Macho Camacho, Marvin
no
Hagler.
way.
Yeah, and his nose the same way got broken a lot. He was like he's a black belt in I think like jujitsu or something. My grandpa was quite a character on his own. So I know a little bit about the boxing world and broken noses. So mine's never been broken. So I'm trying to keep it that way.
Mine has. That's why it's a little bent to the right. Where was he? Was he
In
in
Florida.
what?
Yeah, he's Miami is where he kind of came up, and then he ended up over here near Tampa as well. He's
Are
passed
you,
now, but yeah,
yep.
they know him in the boxing world for sure.
Are you one of the few people who's actually from Florida, lives in Florida and is from Florida?
Born and raised, my dad came here when he was like a very, very young kid, and has been here basically his entire life as well.
I lived in Tampa. I did a 3-year tour down there, and it was actually during 9/11. And that's
Okay.
where CENTCOM,
SOCOM,
yeah, what are the
yeah, Emmett
commands
Till,
for the U.S. military? Yeah,
mhm.
Medill Air Force Base.
Yep.
Yeah, I remember doing a lot of live shots outside of there.
Mhm.
And my news directors at the time were like, "All right, as soon as you can fly, we want you to take a camera on an airplane and just document what it was like." I'm like, all right. So I do this. Of course, second I get off the plane, they just flew me to Atlanta. I had like 3 FBI agents like, all right, who's this weirdo filming everything? I'm like, that probably wasn't the best idea.
Yeah,
But hey, it made,
you're on a list. You're on a
yeah,
list. That's okay.
no,
We
I'm
all
on the
are.
list. All right, man. Thank you so much. Always a pleasure to catch up with you. And we really appreciate your time. And hopefully we'll see you back next week, and maybe only a few more weeks of this to go.
Yeah, appreciate it, man.
He is Peter Tragos at Lawyer You Know. Like him and subscribe him because he's where it's at. Thank you, Peter.
Thank you.